In web development and design, buttons are a key component that enable users to perform specific actions without having to know anything that's happening in the background. And if you are using Notion or building your digital system, whether it be a second brain or a simple task manager, you may be interested in integrating buttons, whether it be for your own use or for your team-wide use, to facilitate the user experience and make sure that everyone can perform actions easily with the simple click of a button. Notion has recently released database buttons, a new property type. And so in this video, we are looking at this new property type, what it allows you to do. And overall, this video will provide an update on the status of buttons in Notion, as well as database automations, which were released a while ago and have seen a few improvements over time. Buttons and automations in Notion are very similar. They have the same steps available and possible actions and configuration features that you can use. And that's why in this video, we are bundling them together to make sure that we can get an overview of the status of things of native automations in Notion. These native automations and buttons do not allow you to perform quite advanced features. For that, there is the Notion API. So for example, if you want to schedule a specific task or automation to run daily or at any specific time interval, that is not possible yet. If you want to, for example, update the status of a parent task whenever all the subtasks are complete, you can't achieve that yet in Notion through the native automations or buttons. But for other more simple use cases, Notion buttons, whether it be in databases, inline or database automations, can help you with streamlining your workflow and make it smoother. Let's start by defining what are buttons in Notion and what are database automations and where you can find those features. When it comes to buttons, there are two types of buttons in Notion. One is an inline button that you can create on any page, and that is available through the / command button. So if I open a page, I can type / button anywhere, select this, and I can create the button with all the actions or steps that I need. And a few days ago, Notion has launched another button that has the same exact functionalities, but it can be a database property. So it's a new property type. You can find it when adding a property. Right here, it is the last option right before ID, so not really the last one, but there is the new tag for now. And if I click on it, this will create a button property in my database, which I can label, for example, create tasks. And I can add all the actions or steps in the same way that I would do in an inline button. Same logic applies, but this time this is clickable directly from the table view without having to open pages, if that is applicable in the specific workflow that we are looking at. And thirdly, database automations are available on any databases and only editable or possible to be created by people who have full access to the database and who are not guests to that database or the Notion workspace overall. And these are available at the top right corner where it says create and view automations. And that's where you can manage automations, create them, name them. And here the value of database automations is that you can also specify what view in the database you want this automation to start from. And so if a view has a filter applied to it that is not a formula, that does not use a formula property, that can be used as the trigger for the database automation, which can be useful for specific use cases. And database automations have triggers and actions. Triggers in this case are webhook based or event based. So it could be a new page added or any property edited or any specific property edited. And then there are actions which are very similar to the actions available on buttons. So you can edit properties, but you can also add pages to other databases or this database. And you can also edit pages in this database or other databases. And through database automations, you can also send Slack notifications, which is an action not available on inline or database buttons in Notion right now. That's an overview of buttons as well as database automations in Notion. Fundamentally, the steps available are very, very similar among all of these specific elements in the Notion UI. And one Easter egg or new feature that was released silently but can improve the visual appearance of a database in Notion lately and is not really related to buttons, but I think it's worth sharing here, is the ability to hide icons on database pages. So if you go to the three dots, you can see layout, and there is a new option right here that says show page icons, which will show these icons right here, or you can hide them, which creates a more linear and clean look at least in my opinion. And then you can always open the pages to see more content, and you would also see the icon in that case. Now let's look at a specific use case for using buttons as well as database automations, and how setting these up will differ depending on whether you use an inline button, a button property, or a database automation. So for this use case, that is a very popular one, let's assume that we have a specific task that has some predefined subtasks that we want users to be able to create within our tasks database. First, let's explore how we can implement that through an inline button on a task template. In this case, here I have a template called tasks. If I edit this template, I can see that I have already created this button inside the page. Maybe let's make it full width for clarity here. And I created this button by typing /button. And now this interface is open and I can edit how the button looks like, what are the steps, and what's the button name and icon. So if I edit this button, I can see that I called it add default subtasks, and I gave it the plus icon in color orange. Next up, the trigger is always when the button is clicked, so this can't be changed. So this is a user-based trigger as opposed to an event-based trigger, which is what database automations instead are based on. And if I scroll down, you can see that I created 3 example subtasks that I want created when the user clicks this button on the template on the task page. Subtask number A, where the parent task is this page, so there will be the dynamic variable that determines the page when this button is clicked. And that's because we want to create that relation between the subtasks created and the parent task where they are created from, so that each subtask is unique to the parent task. And then I clicked on the 3 dots right here and I duplicated the step and just changed the name to subtask B and left the same relation property pre-filled right here. And you can see here that when adding a step to an inline button, these are the options. You can insert blocks. That would allow you to insert blocks that could be any Notion block, or at least the foundational blocks that you can find using this / command. And when that button is clicked, that block will be created. For example, you could use this if you want to create a toggle through the click of the button, or a subpage, or a database, or a table. So all these kind of blocks and commands are available when inserting blocks and the click of a button. Additionally, another action that you can have on buttons is to add pages to a specific database. And that's really what I used here. I used that action and then specified the target database, which is the task database. And I also specified the template that I want to use to create that task, which is the task template, the default one in this specific case. The third action available on Notion buttons are to edit pages in a specific database. So in here, to set this up, you would select the database where you want to edit pages on, for example, the task database. And you can also specify a filter for the pages that you want to edit through this action. In this case here, you can define the filter exactly like you would on a Notion database. So the UI is exactly the same. You can specify the property, for example, assignee, the rule, for example, contains, and the specific value of that property. For example, me, that is dynamic based on the person clicking that button, or a specific user that will be pre-populated at the button click. And once you define the filter, if any, you can then edit specific properties within the pages that match that filter in the database selected. And you can notice here a first limitation that I also mentioned at the beginning of this video regarding buttons as well as database automations in Notion. And that is that when it comes to editing pages, you can't filter dynamically. For example, one thing that might be a useful use case is to set all the subtasks as complete whenever the parent task is completed. And ideally that could be done via a button, or it could be automated via a database automation. That, however, is not currently possible within Notion buttons or database automations, because in filters I can't reference pages dynamically. So in here, to do that, I will need to select, for example, the parent task contains, and then here I will need to have an option that says this page, which is exactly like what I use here, this page that's dynamic. Whereas in filters, I do not have that option. And so I can't dynamically set the editing action for pages in databases. Additional steps in Notion buttons, as well as automations, most of them, is to show a confirmation panel. That is just a way to warn the user that they are about to run a specific set of actions. And so if they want to continue, they will have a button to click continue, or if they want to cancel that run, they can also cancel it. Additionally, you can set an action that is to open a specific page. And finally, you can also edit properties in the database where the button is located. In this case, because this button is inside a page in the task database, you can see the properties of the task database that can be edited right here. For now, we're just going to use the create page in the task database action, repeated 3 times for 3 default subtasks that we have for this kind of template that we want to implement. And you can see down here that I have a table view that is a linked database view created by using the /linked view of database command. And in there, the source database that I selected is the task database, and I filtered this dynamically to only show those tasks where the parent task contains task, that is the name of the template. So that's going to be dynamically updated whenever I create a new task using this template. And that's because down here, I just want to see the subtasks for the task that I create. So practically speaking, let's see what this looks like to a user. So as a user, I'm going to create a new task right here. I'm going to name the task. I can then assign specific properties. And in this case, I'm going to skip through them, and I can then select this button to create subtasks. And those subtasks are displayed directly within the table view of the task database inside the task page. So let's open this page, and you can notice first that one interesting quirk of buttons is that the steps created in reverse order if there is no sorting that applies to them. And a second thing that might be not ideal is that the button, after being clicked, remains on the page or on the database. So as a user, I can click this button multiple times or as many times as I want. So that could create a few possibilities of errors from users or from yourself. So that is something to keep in mind as well. Now let's try to look at a database button and how the same exact workflow would look like in that case. And in the case of database buttons, I do not need to set it up on a template because the button can reference the page that it is located on, and on each page it will vary accordingly. Let's go to the button property and click on edit. The interface is very similar. In here, the additional feature is that I can define a label on the button, that is the text that appears on the button. And when the button is clicked, I will then add actions, which I did using this plus button, and I selected add page to. So same exact action as the one that I showed you earlier in the inline button on this video. And you can also see that these other actions are very familiar. In fact, they are the same as the ones available on the inline button, except there is no possibility to add blocks to a page, at least as of now. So I created these steps, and the parent task relation is dynamically populated as this page. That means the page where the button is clicked on. If I were to create a new task and click this button here, you will see them show up on the subtable here below. I'm going to create tasks, and the exact same outcome as before is achieved. And finally, the third option to create subtasks automatically, and in this case without the need of a user clicking a button, is through a database automation. And the same exact logic applies. So right here, if I go to the database automations, you can see I already created one with all these steps, and I did it by selecting new automation. This is only possible if you are not a guest on the Notion workspace where you want to create the database automations. So let's look at how this is set up. You can see that here I can get a clear name, which can be very useful, especially if you work with teams, because if you have many database automations, they can get mixed up and creating a bit of confusions among people. And in this case, we want to create subtasks for any task in the view tasks in the tasks database, so regardless of any filters. Otherwise, we could also select a specific view that we want to use for this automation. And the trigger is whenever a page is added to the task database, then we add tasks where the parent task is at this page. That is a dynamic reference. So exactly same setup as the database button or the inline button that we saw earlier. Then I duplicated these steps and just changed the name of the button right there. Notice that more realistically, the trigger of this automation could be a specific view that shows only parent tasks. So in that case, we could create a specific view that is filtered for a specific tag, for example, that you could have here that could say parent task. And whenever a task is tagged with that tag, it will then enter that view and hence trigger the automation. But in this case, for this example, we're going to use any task. If I am to create a new task, that's the new page added, and you can already see that all the subtasks were created. automatically, effectively making buttons useless, because in this case, these subtasks are automatically generated for me as opposed to me as a user having to take an action. The advantage of this is that users do not need to click a button, and the user error might be reduced because buttons can't be automatically deleted, and so users could click buttons multiple times. The possible disadvantage of this option is that sometimes the automation might not create all tasks, or sometimes a task might be created by mistake by a user, but yet the automation doesn't know that, and it will run anyways and create all the subtasks, which would then be left orphaned, namely without a parent task in the database, and hence possibly creating a bit of confusion among users. And that concludes the overview of the new database property, that is the button property type in Notion, as well as inline buttons and database automations, looking at a specific use case that is creating default subtasks for your tasks, which can be also applied to projects if you like, in that case, as long as you have a relation between the specific databases that you want to use for that use case. For now, that is it. You can find links in the description regarding these features and official articles. For now, thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.